much prayer has happened over these night hours, in large monasteries there is very little sleep. The long vigils are fully sung, often in an unheated church, and then the celebrations begin. There is the very solemn Mass at midnight, which, if there's an abbot, would be pontifical. But then those monasteries which do not necessarily have concelebration would then have individual masses, and there might be 3 each. And Lords and Prime, the result being that there is very little sleep at all in some of the big French monasteries. And out there in the world, there is much prayer going on between the various celebrations of the vigil, those of the dawn, and those throughout the day until about 1 o'clock. And there is a certain calm and peacefulness in the air, especially in the pre-dawn where we find ourselves right now, for nature is asleep and dreaming, and there is no noise. There is a stillness around, the stillness which would have been the cushion that welcomed the incarnation. This night, this little chapel was full of bodies of various descriptions, and from quite a long way away actually. And quite by surprise, something happened. In the evening, one of the people that called was somebody who comes to us at Johnstown, and he has a little girl about your age, slightly younger. And he had something of which I was aware, but which I was not in the least expecting. He had picked up what I had mentioned the previous Easter. He had already come wanting more information about it, and I had given him, or photocopied for him, something which I had on it, the Holy Light. He communicated this to a common friend of ours, Joe. And he also found more about it on actually EWTN, which was talking about it that Easter. So they both put their heads together and hatched a plot, at least Joe did, under his own bonnet. I don't know exactly the details, I must get them from Bosco, but he was a man of means and energy, and he was determined to get hold of the Holy Light. I don't know how on earth he managed it, because it's very difficult to get from one point of the globe to the other with a living light not extinguished. But he did. And Bosco has it now. He came with big candles to be blessed yesterday, so as to have always enough candles in the house to keep it going perpetually. And he wanted me to have the flame. And so I have it. And it's now before the crib in the hall there. And as I looked at this flame, I remembered how when it is ignited from heaven, for the first minutes, and Bosco knew it, because he was watching some of these YouTubes about it, he could see that it was quite miraculous, and that people were playing with it on their beards and it wasn't burning. Then after a few minutes, it does become ordinary, and that's what we have now, but it has been lit by the finger of God each Easter. But I mentioned it last night in the context of the Gospel that we had at midnight, and of which the beginning of this Mass of the Dawn speaks indirectly. Lux fulgebit, a light will shine. The angels were singing. They were, it says quite clearly, surrounded by light. A great light shone about them. Now remember, in the shepherds' fields, you can still visit them near Bethlehem, there aren't too many lampposts around. So one sees the stars, and any angelic beings around one will perceive very clearly against the backdrop of complete and utter darkness, which right now we have actually still here. So can you imagine the scene? These simple shepherds were suddenly confronted by beings that they realized to be quite different from their own. Now shepherds are simple people, calm people. They do not normally take their transistor with them to watch the sheep. They have lots of time and they can gaze at the stars. And when you gaze at the stars, even though they didn't know it, they were gazing at time gone by. Because light that comes from a star, by the time it gets to us, reaches us several light years away. So, what does that mean? Actually, a distant star may no longer be there by the time light has got to us. We're looking at history. These angels are outside our geography, but they're here. And we forget how actually at the altar we have something similar to what was happening right there. We had last year a discussion amongst ourselves with regard to the authenticity or not of what had been by chance captured on amateur video at Bethlehem. Some say it must have been photoshopped, but it's so amateur that one tends to think they could make a better job of it. Actually, the poor quality of it is, in a sense, the best argument for its naturalness and unspoiledness. What happened is this. At the very spot, and it is the very spot, we know that from unbroken history, hic verbum caro factum est, here the Lord became flesh. There were pilgrims there in Bethlehem, and there happened to be, and actually the person had forgotten it was actually still on, a video camera. And at a certain point, right there where the Lord was born, the form of the child Jesus appeared. And people will say, well, how is he in that position with arms outstretched? Well, it will make a lot of sense. Isn't that the position in which our Blessed Lady would have held the child? Because the child, too small, couldn't have stood up on his own, and she would have held him up, and perhaps people coming, like the Magi and the shepherds, she would have in some way welcomed them by letting the Holy Child welcome them. Who knows how he actually did so? Presumably he would have a glorious angelic smile. And the angels do not appear on that amateur clip, but we can be pretty sure that every time we have the incarnation repeating itself, as it were, at the Mass itself, they're right there. And we do not actually perceive the amount of energy that's around in the sacramental sphere. Just the other day I was confessing somebody in the chapel there, and that person at the end of the confession said that at the moment of absolution she had seen something, that her soul, she had seen it, she was completely turned from grey to bright white. She'd actually seen it at the moment of absolution. And that kind of thing I've heard from other people, that at the moment of absolution people are touched powerfully by grace. Well, this quiet moment in the old rite of whispering the words of consecration is something of that silent explosivity of the Holy Night repeating itself in the stillness precisely of a quiet chapel, more easily to be perceived. But we forget that we're actually handling cosmic dynamite, the very power that made the world out of nothing, and which is coming, as it were, out of those distant stars. The big bang, whatever it was, that came out of what was only there from all eternity, God himself, is right here exploding. And at that moment of consecration, we're actually there with a whole court waiting for the incarnation to repeat itself. And therefore it is very fitting that at the end of the Mass we say those words again, et verbum caro factum est, which in some way is the natural conclusion of Bethlehem, the house of bread, the tabernacle which the Lord chose for himself, a simple host, a simple chalice. Out of humility, like the Holy Child, not insisting on his rights and glory, but wanting us to do it for him. So we give him the maximum, as the angels did, and with interiority welcome the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who asks us to give him his majesty due. Redemptoris Mater, que per via celi porta mane, et stella maris, succure cadenti, sorgere qui curat populo, tuque genuisti, natura mirandi, tuum sanctum genitorium, Virgo pius, ac posterius, Gabrielis arbore, sumens innodavi, peccatorum miserere.